Earth reaction to genocide. No more playing Civilized. The conference hall floated in the void between stars, a massive structure built by species who had forgotten what war truly meant. Inside, representatives from 43 different worlds gathered in their various forms. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some had scales, others had fur or skin or crystalline surfaces. They all shared one thing in common. They believed themselves civilized. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the edge of Earth's delegation area, watching the proceedings with dark eyes that had seen too much. She was 57 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair and scars hidden beneath her pristine blue uniform. The younger diplomats around her shifted nervously, but Chen remained still as stone. 200 years had passed since humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council. 2 centuries of playing nice, of following rules, of presenting Earth as a reformed species that had outgrown its violent past. Chen remembered the real Earth, the one before first contact. She had been a girl during the last conflicts, had watched her father come home from the resource wars with haunted eyes. That version of humanity had been deemed too dangerous for galactic society. So humanity had changed, or pretended to. They became mediators, peacekeepers, and cultural ambassadors. They shared their art, music, and literature while carefully hiding their military history. The council species grew comfortable around humans, viewing them as soft creatures too emotional and weak to pose any real threat. The Cavrix Empire in particular seemed to enjoy mocking Earth's representatives. The Cavrix were large reptilian beings with thick scales and cold eyes. Their empire controlled 3 major star systems and produced rare minerals that powered most galactic technology. This gave them influence in the council, protection from consequences. They expanded aggressively, pushing into territories claimed by smaller species. The council always found excuses for them. 3 weeks ago, Haven's Rest had gone silent. The colony world was home to 2.3 million humans, most of them families who had chosen the frontier life. Engineers, farmers, teachers, children playing under alien suns. The communications array stopped transmitting on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. Earth's initial response had been concern, not panic. Technical failures happened in space. Then the escape pod arrived. Chen closed her eyes, remembering the faces of the 12 survivors. A maintenance worker who had been in the underground facilities when the attack began. 2 children whose parents had shoved them into the pod's last seats. A teacher who had watched her students die. They had brought footage recorded on personal devices in those final hours. The Cavrix military had arrived without warning. No demands, no ultimatums, no chance for surrender. They simply began orbital bombardment, targeting population centers with methodical precision. When the survivors emerged from shelters, Cavrix ground forces were waiting. The footage showed soldiers executing civilians systematically, efficiently, without emotion. Men, women, children. It didn't matter. 2.3 million people. Gone in 72 hours. The Cavrix claimed it was preventative action. They presented falsified evidence to the council showing human military buildups, plans for expansion into disputed territory. All lies but convenient lies, lies that gave council members an excuse to avoid difficult decisions. The emergency session had been called 48 hours ago. Chen had watched the proceedings with growing coldness. Species after species stood to express concern, to call for investigation, to suggest diplomatic channels. The Cavrix representative, Ambassador Thruck, had been almost bored in his responses. He knew the council wouldn't act. The vote came on sanctions and stern warnings. Nothing with teeth, nothing that would hurt the Cavrix economy or military, nothing that acknowledged 2.3 million murders. When the vote concluded, the council president turned his 3-stalked eyes toward Earth's delegation. His translator converted his chemical signals into standard speech. We understand Earth's grief. The council asks that humanity pursue appropriate diplomatic channels. We trust that Earth will respond with the wisdom and peace you have shown these 2 centuries. The chamber fell silent. Every species present knew humanity's reputation. Peaceful, reasonable, bound by rules and procedures. They expected protests, perhaps angry words, maybe even a walkout. But ultimately, compliance. Admiral Chen stepped forward into the holographic projection field. Her image appeared above the council floor, 20 meters tall, visible to every delegate. She looked at them each in turn, her expression unnervingly calm. "The Galactic Council has spoken," she said quietly. Her voice carried clearly through the translation systems. "Earth has heard your judgment. You have determined that the systematic murder of 2.3 million human beings warrants sanctions and stern warnings." Ambassador Throck's scales rippled in what might have been amusement. "Humanity must understand that expansion comes with risks. Perhaps your colony was too aggressive in their territorial claims." Chen's smile was cold enough to freeze hydrogen. "Thank you, Ambassador, for clarifying the Council's position. You have been most helpful." She turned her attention back to the Council President. "Humanity will respond appropriately to this situation. We thank the Council for making clear exactly where Earth stands in galactic society. We thank you for showing us the value you place on human lives." There was something in her tone that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. The Centauri representative, a species generally friendly to Earth, leaned forward in concern. "Admiral Chen, Earth must understand that rash action would be ill-advised. The Council can mediate further discussions with the Cavrix. Violence is not the answer." "Violence," Chen repeated softly. "No, I suppose it isn't. Not in civilized society." Her smile widened slightly. "Earth will consider all appropriate responses. We will, of course, inform the Council of our decisions." "Good day, distinguished delegates." The transmission ended abruptly. Chen's hologram vanished, leaving confused silence in its wake. The Council members looked at each other uncertainly. The human response had been too calm, too measured, too accepting. Several species who had studied Earth's culture felt a prickle of unease. Ambassador Throck settled back in his seat, satisfied. The humans would complain, perhaps impose their own meaningless sanctions, and then life would continue. The Cavrix Empire had eliminated a potential competitor before it could grow strong. Strategic thinking, proper expansion. This was how powerful species operated. Back on Earth, Admiral Chen removed her uniform jacket and walked through the corridors of military command. Officers stood and saluted as she passed. She acknowledged them with brief nods, her mind already working through calculations and strategies. She entered the war room, a facility that hadn't been fully activated in nearly 2 centuries. The holographic displays came to life around her, showing star charts, fleet positions, resource allocations. The other chiefs of staff were already waiting. Men and women who, like Chen, remembered what humanity had been. Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb spoke first. "The Council response?" "As expected," Chen said flatly. "Sanctions, warnings, no real consequences." "So we proceed with option 7? Asked General Yuki Tanaka, head of ground forces. Chen looked at the star chart showing the Cavrix Empire. 12 worlds, 3 major fleet concentrations, resource production facilities that supplied half the galaxy. They thought themselves untouchable. They thought humanity weak. "We proceed," she confirmed. "Send the message to all commands. Activate the black site facilities. Begin mobilization protocols. Silent running. No external communications that can be intercepted." She pulled up another display showing archived files that hadn't been opened in 200 years. Humanity's complete military history. Every war, every weapon, every tactical doctrine they had carefully hidden from galactic view. "And send them a gift," she added quietly. "They want to know what they're dealing with? Show them. Declassify everything. Let them see what we were before we decided to play civilized." The other officers nodded grimly. They had all known this day might come. They had all hoped it wouldn't. But the Cavrix had made their choice, and the Council had made theirs. Now humanity would make a choice of its own, across Earth, in facilities hidden deep underground and in asteroid bases disguised as mining operations. Personnel received coded messages. Equipment that had been maintained but never used began powering up. Shipyards that officially built cargo vessels started assembling something else entirely. Scientists and engineers who had spent careers researching theoretical applications of physics suddenly found their theories becoming very practical. "Admiral." Chen stood alone in the war room after the others left, looking at the memorial display showing faces from Haven's Rest. 2.3 million faces, most of them smiling in photos taken before the attack. Children, families, people who had trusted that civilization meant something. "You wanted to see if we would break?" she whispered to the image of Ambassador Throck on her screen. "Congratulations. You're about to learn why humanity spent 2 centuries building cages for ourselves." She pressed the final authorization code. Across human space, military forces began moving with silent purpose. The galaxy was about to remember something it had never actually known. Humanity hadn't forgo. The data transmission arrived at the Galactic Council headquarters exactly 48 hours after Admiral Chen's departure. It was massive, containing thousands of exabytes of information, and it came with a simple message: educational materials from Earth. Council technicians initially assumed it was cultural information, perhaps human art or scientific papers. They were wrong. The files contained Earth's complete military history. It started with ancient wars, conflicts fought with bronze and iron when humanity was still confined to one planet. Images of Roman legions, Mongol hordes, medieval sieges. The documentation was thorough, showing casualty figures, tactical developments, the evolution of warfare from individual combat to organized slaughter. Then came the modern era. The council members who reviewed the files felt growing horror as they progressed through Earth's timeline. World War I, industrial warfare, chemical weapons, millions dead in trenches. World War II, strategic bombing, genocide, and finally nuclear weapons that could glass entire cities in seconds. The Cold War. Enough atomic weapons built to destroy Earth hundreds of times over. Regional conflicts, asymmetric warfare, urban combat insurgencies. Humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. The files included tactical manuals, weapon specifications, strategic doctrines. They showed submarine warfare, carrier groups, armored divisions, special operations forces. They documented psychological warfare, economic warfare, cyber warfare. Every method humanity had developed to destroy itself was laid out in meticulous detail. Most disturbing were the casualty figures. Over the course of recorded history, humans had killed approximately 1 billion of their own species in warfare. 1 billion, from a population that had never exceeded 8 billion before space colonization. The final file contained a single message from Admiral Chen. This is what we were, what we chose to leave behind when we joined you among the stars, what you have forced us to remember. We showed you our better nature for 2 centuries. You mistook it for weakness. That was your error, not ours. The transmission spread through council systems. Delegates who had dismissed Earth as soft and emotional found themselves reviewing footage of human soldiers fighting in conditions that would kill most species. Humans enduring Arctic cold, desert heat, jungle diseases, mountain altitudes. Humans who kept fighting with injuries that should have been fatal. Humans who adapted to any terrain, any climate, any enemy. The Cavrix Empire received the same files. Ambassador Throck reviewed them in his private chambers, his scales shifting through colors that indicated confusion and slight concern. The military history was impressive in a primitive way, but surely obsolete. The Cavrix had plasma weapons, energy shields, faster-than-light travel. What did ancient projectile weapons and chemical explosives matter? His military advisors were less confident. They noted patterns in human warfare that troubled them. Humans fought dirty when necessary. They used terrain to their advantage. They excelled at asymmetric combat, at turning enemy strengths into weaknesses. Most concerning, humans seemed capable of enduring and inflicting casualties at levels that would break any civilized species. But the Cavrix military outnumbered human forces 3-1. Their ships were larger, their shields more advanced. They had conquered 12 worlds and absorbed 3 other species. They knew warfare, real warfare, not the primitive conflicts from Earth's past. The Cavrix High Command ordered fleet mobilization anyway. Better to crush this human defiance quickly, before other species got ideas about challenging Cavrix authority. They would show the galaxy what happened to species who forgot their place. On Earth, Admiral Chen stood in a facility that officially didn't exist. It was built inside a hollowed asteroid in the outer solar system, hidden among thousands of similar rocks. The base had been constructed over a century, prepared for a day humanity hoped would never come. Dr. James Morrison, head of the Special Weapons Development Program, walked beside her through corridors lined with sealed chambers. He was 70 years old, white-haired, and had spent his entire career working on projects the Council could never know about. When we joined the Council, we agreed to limitations on our military technology, Morrison said, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. Energy weapons were approved. Kinetic weapons were approved, but only within certain parameters. Nothing that could be considered weapons of mass destruction. Nothing that violated the Council's warfare conventions. The Council conventions that just proved worthless, Chen said flatly. Morrison nodded. We followed the rules. We built ships and weapons that met Council standards. But we also continued research on what we weren't allowed to have, just in case. He entered a code and a massive door slid open. Beyond lay a factory floor that stretched for kilometers, filled with automated assembly lines currently silent. Relativistic kinetic impactors, Morrison explained. Simple physics, really. Accelerate a dense object to 90% light speed, aim it at a target. The kinetic energy release is comparable to a nuclear weapon, but it's just a piece of metal moving very fast. No radiation, no chemical reaction, technically not a weapon of mass destruction. Just mass moving at destructive speed, Chen said, a grim smile crossing her face. Exactly. We built millions of them. Small, difficult to track, capable of being launched from standard cargo containers. To sensors, they look like space debris until they're too close to intercept. We also developed stealth coding that makes them nearly invisible until impact. Chen studied the production lines. How many can we deploy? We have 20 million in storage. We can produce another 10 million per week if needed. They moved to another section. Morrison showed her electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable ships without destroying them. Nanomachine swarms that could disassemble enemy infrastructure at the molecular level, and biological agents specifically tailored to affect Cavric's physiology, without harming other species. We never used any of this, Morrison said quietly. Never even tested most of it in combat conditions. We just built it and hoped we'd never need it. The Cavrics gave us a reason, Chen replied. She looked at the aging scientist. Can you live with what we're about to do? Morrison thought of the footage from Haven's Rest. Children running from explosions. Families huddled together in their final moments. Civilians executed while begging for mercy. Yes, he said simply. Can you? Chen didn't answer immediately. She had spent her career preparing for peace, hoping the worst of humanity could remain buried. Now she would resurrect those demons and aim them at an empire that thought itself untouchable. We'll find out, she finally said. The plan was already in motion. Human cargo ships supposedly carrying trade goods were repositioning throughout Cavric space. Each ship's hold contained thousands of kinetic impactors and their launch systems. The Cavric's navy paid them no attention. Just human merchants, harmless and predictable. Human intelligence services, which the Council believed were limited to basic information gathering, had spent decades mapping every Cavric's military installation. They knew the location of every shipyard, every command center, every defense platform. They had infiltrated Cavric's computer network so thoroughly that they could read the High Command's personal messages. The Cavrics thought they were preparing to crush a human fleet. They had no idea the weapons were already in position, hidden in plain sight. Admiral Chen sent one more message to the Cavric's High Command. It was simple, direct, and deeply troubling to anyone who understood human history. You wanted to see what happens when humanity breaks. You wanted to test our resolve, our willingness to accept injustice. Thank you for the clarity. Now you will learn why we built cages for ourselves. You will learn what we kept locked away for 2 centuries. Most importantly, you will learn this truth. We didn't become peaceful because we forgot how to fight. We became peaceful because we remembered how good we were at it. The message included a countdown timer, 72 hours. No explanation of what would happen when it reached 0. Across Cavric space, military commanders tried to interpret the threat. Was it a bluff? A psychological warfare tactic? Their intelligence services reported no unusual human fleet movements, no massive military buildup. Just those cargo ships in orbit conducting routine business. Ambassador Throck addressed the Council, his voice full of confidence. Earth attempts to frighten the Cavrics with empty threats. We are not intimidated. Our fleets are mobilized, our defenses are prepared. If humanity wishes war, we will provide it. We will finish what we began at Haven's Rest. Several council members shifted uncomfortably at his words. The Centauri delegate stood, his tentacles coiling in agitation. This is madness. The Cavric should seek peaceful resolution. Earth's military history should serve as a warning, not a challenge. History, Throck said dismissively. Ancient history. Primitive warfare. The Cavric's empire has evolved beyond such barbarism. We fight with honor, with superior technology, with civilized methods. The council session ended with no resolution. The galaxy waited to see what would happen when the human countdown reached 0. On Earth, Admiral Chen gave the final authorization codes. Across Cavric space, cargo containers opened. Millions of small objects launched into carefully calculated trajectories. They were too small to track. The countdown reached 0 at 0300 Galactic Standard Time. Across 3 Cavrix border systems, military installations detected unusual electromagnetic readings. Sensors flickered warnings moments before the impacts began. The kinetic impactors arrived at 90% light speed, too fast for shields or point defense systems to react. Each projectile carried the energy of a small nuclear weapon, released purely through velocity and mass. In 6 minutes, 40% of the Cavrix border defense grid simply ceased to exist. Orbital platforms exploded in silent fireballs. Ground-based command centers became craters. Military shipyards disintegrated into clouds of debris. The attacks were surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating. Not a single civilian target was hit. Every impact struck military infrastructure with perfect accuracy. The Cavrix High Command watched in stunned horror as their defensive perimeter collapsed. They had been waiting for human fleets preparing for conventional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, invisible weapons moving at relativistic speeds had shredded their defenses before they could respond. Admiral Chen's face appeared on every Cavrix military channel simultaneously. The humans had hacked their entire communication network. "You wanted to see if humanity would break," she said, her voice calm and cold. "Congratulations. Now you will learn why we built cages for ourselves. This is day 1. We will continue until you understand what you have done." The transmission ended. No demands for surrender. No terms offered. Just a statement of fact. The Cavrix immediately dispatched their main battle fleet toward human space, determined to crush this insurrection with overwhelming force. Their fleet consisted of 300 capital ships, each larger and more heavily armed than human vessels. They would find Earth's fleet and destroy it in glorious battle. But Earth's fleet didn't engage them. Human ships appeared at the edges of Cavrix systems, launched attacks on automated refueling stations and supply depots, then vanished before Cavrix forces could respond. They used hit-and-run tactics, striking everywhere and committing nowhere. Each raid destroyed critical infrastructure without ever engaging in direct ship combat. The Cavrix military had been built for conventional warfare, fleet actions where superior numbers and firepower ensured victory. They didn't know how to fight an enemy who refused to fight fair, who struck from unexpected angles and disappeared into the void. Commander Thrak, nephew of Ambassador Thrak, led a squadron hunting human raiders. His ships were faster, his weapons more powerful. But every time they arrived at a raiding location, the humans were gone. His crew grew frustrated, demoralized by an enemy they couldn't catch. Then the psychological warfare began. Human hackers took complete control of Cavrix civilian communication networks. On every screen, every device, every public display, the footage from Haven's Rest began broadcasting. The systematic execution of civilians, the crying children, the destroyed homes, the burning cities. The Cavrix military had kept these images from their own population, claiming Haven's Rest had been a military target. Now every Cavrix citizen saw the truth of what had been done in their name. Protests erupted across Cavrix worlds. Parents saw human children being killed and thought of their own offspring. Workers saw hospitals being destroyed and wondered what kind of war targeted medical facilities. The Cavrix government had told them they were fighting dangerous human expansionists. The footage showed them committing genocide against families. The galactic community watched these developments with growing alarm. The council called emergency sessions daily, but no one knew how to respond. Humanity had formally withdrawn from council membership, ignored all communications, and seemed determined to prosecute this war until the Cavrix Empire ceased to exist. Species that had been friendly with Earth tried to make contact. The Centauri ambassador managed to reach Admiral Chen through back channels. "Admiral, please. The Council understands Earth's anger. We can mediate a ceasefire, establish negotiations. This level of warfare serves no one." Chen's response was broadcast publicly. "You had your chance to mediate. You chose to let genocide stand without consequences. Now watch what happens when humans stop asking permission. Tell the Council that Earth will return when we're finished teaching this lesson." Several species threatened sanctions against Earth. Chen's response was to send them copies of Earth's military history with highlighted sections on economic warfare. The sanctions stopped being discussed. The Cavrix High Command faced an impossible situation. Their main fleet was chasing ghosts while their infrastructure crumbled. Supply lines were disrupted, leaving ships stranded without fuel. Their people were protesting in the streets, demanding answers about Haven's rest, and the humans showed no signs of stopping. Ambassador Throck addressed the council in desperation. Earth must be stopped. They wage war without honor, without following accepted conventions. They attack infrastructure instead of engaging our military directly. They hack our systems and spread propaganda. This is not civilized warfare. The Centauri ambassador's response was cold. You killed 2.3 million civilians. You committed genocide, and you expect them to fight with honor? The 72-hour mark arrived. The Cavrix wondered if this meant the human assault would end. Instead, it escalated. A massive human fleet, far larger than intelligence estimates had suggested, appeared in orbit around the Cavrix homeworld. The planet's defense platforms prepared for orbital bombardment, ready to shoot down incoming missiles and energy weapons. But the bombardment never came. Instead, thousands of small objects launched from human ships. They weren't weapons. They were boarding pods, hardened capsules carrying human soldiers in powered armor. The Cavrix defenders stared in confusion. Boarding actions were considered obsolete, suicidal tactics from a primitive era. Modern warfare was conducted at distance with energy weapons and missiles. No civilized species sent soldiers into direct combat when technology could do the fighting. The humans had different ideas about warfare. The pods crashed through the upper atmosphere, their heat shields glowing red. Point defense systems shot down hundreds, but thousands more made it through. They slammed into military bases, government buildings, and command centers across the planet. Armored humans poured out, weapons ready. The Cavrix military had never trained for ground combat at this scale. Their soldiers were accustomed to garrison duty, maintaining order through technological superiority. They had armor, they had weapons, but they had never fought an enemy like this. Human soldiers moved through Cavrix facilities with terrifying efficiency. They used tactics refined through centuries of urban combat, room-clearing procedures developed in wars the galaxy had never seen. They moved in small teams covering each other, communicating with hand signals and encrypted channels. Most importantly, they were careful. Civilians were directed to safe areas. Non-military personnel were restrained but unharmed. Children were moved away from combat zones. The humans fought with controlled, precise violence, targeting only those who resisted. The Cavrix military realized with horror that humans were better at close combat than any species in the galaxy. Their reflexes were faster, their endurance greater. They fought in conditions that would incapacitate most beings. Smoke-filled corridors, damaged life support systems, zero-gravity environments. Human soldiers seemed to thrive in chaos. Commander Thrak led his elite guard in defense of the military command center. His soldiers had the best equipment, the finest training the Cavrix could provide. They lasted 14 minutes against a human assault team of equal size. Thrak found himself on his knees, armor cracked, weapon knocked away. A human soldier stood over him, rifle pointed at his head. The human's face was hidden behind a helmet, but Thrak could feel the cold evaluation in that gaze. Surrender is an option, the human said in perfect Cavrix language. Your choice. Thrak surrendered. So did most of his command staff. The humans took them alive, secured them, and moved on to the next objective. Within 18 hours, every major military installation on the Cavrix homeworld was under human control. The government buildings were surrounded. The planetary defense fleet hung in orbit, weapons powered down under threat from human ships that had proven they could destroy them whenever they chose. Admiral Chen finally made contact with what remained of Cavrix High Command. The meeting was held via hologram, Chen appearing in the main council chamber where Cavrix leaders had gathered in defeat. You have a choice, she told them, her voice carrying none of the diplomatic softness they expected. Unconditional surrender, war crimes trials for everyone involved in the Haven's Rest genocide, and complete demilitarization of your empire. Or we continue this war until there is no Cavrix military left to fight. The Cavrix Supreme Commander, Scale Lord Vrex, struggled to maintain dignity in defeat. You have proven your point. Humanity is dangerous. We surrender. But we demand honorable terms befitting. You demand nothing, Chen interrupted. You slaughtered millions of civilians. You committed genocide. You don't get to negotiate terms. You get to accept our... The structure appeared in orbit above the Cavrix homeworld 3 weeks after the surrender. It was massive, built from materials transported through human cargo fleets and assembled by construction drones working around the clock. When complete, it resembled a judicial courthouse from Earth's history, but floating in space where everyone could see it. Admiral Chen named it the Justice Station. The galaxy watched with confusion and growing fascination as humanity did something unprecedented. They were holding war crimes trials. The concept was foreign to most council species. When wars ended, defeated leaders were typically executed, exiled, or absorbed into the victor's government. Quick, efficient, final. Justice was assumed, not demonstrated. The idea of a lengthy legal process to determine individual guilt seemed strange, almost wasteful. But Earth insisted. 347 Cavrix military officers, government officials, and political leaders were transported to the Justice Station. They were the ones human intelligence had identified as directly involved in planning, authorizing, or executing the Haven's Rest genocide. Each one would face individual trial, with evidence presented, witnesses called, and verdicts delivered. The trials were broadcast live across every communication network in the galaxy. Humanity made sure no one could avoid seeing what happened when civilized justice was applied to mass murder. Judge Rebecca Martinez presided over the first trial. She was 73 years old, had served as a high court justice on Earth for 30 years, and had absolutely no patience for excuses. The defendant was Scale Commander Vrecht, who had led the ground forces at Haven's Rest. The prosecution was led by Commander David Foster, formerly a military lawyer, now tasked with proving what everyone already knew, that genocide had occurred, and that specific individuals were responsible. Vrecht sat in the defendant's chair, his scales a dull gray color indicating stress. His defense attorney, appointed by the human court since Cavrix law had no equivalent, sat beside him. The attorney was human, a woman named Sarah Winters who had defended war criminals on Earth and understood the importance of proper legal process, even for the obviously guilty. Commander Vrecht, Foster began, standing before the massive display screens. On the date in question, you led 3 battalions of Cavrix soldiers onto the surface of Haven's Rest. Is this correct? Yes, Brecht replied through the translator. And your orders were to secure the planet? Yes. Foster nodded and activated the screens. Footage appeared, taken from Cavrix military recorders. It showed Vrecht soldiers moving through civilian areas, methodically executing anyone they found. Families huddled in homes, children in schools, workers in fields, all killed with efficient, emotionless precision. Explain to the court what we're seeing, Foster said quietly. Vrecht watched the footage, his scales shifting uncomfortably. We were following orders to eliminate potential threats. These were threats? Foster pointed to a group of children visible on the screen, running from soldiers. The footage showed them being shot down. 5-year-old children were threats to the Cavrix military? Silence. Answer the question, Commander. Vrecht's voice was barely audible. We had orders to eliminate all human presence, to ensure they could not return or retaliate. Total elimination was the objective. Genocide, Foster said flatly. The word you're describing is genocide, the deliberate, systematic destruction of an entire population. The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness was called. The 12 survivors from the escape pod testified, describing what they had seen and experienced. Experts analyzed military communications showing Vrecht had received explicit orders to leave no survivors. Evidence proved that civilians had attempted to surrender and were killed anyway. Through it all, Vrecht sat silent, watching the evidence pile up against him. His defense attorney did her job professionally, challenging evidence where possible, ensuring proper legal procedures were followed. But there was no real defense against the mountain of proof. When the verdict came, Judge Martinez's voice was firm and clear. Scale Commander Vrecht, this court finds you guilty of genocide, crimes against humanity, and murder of civilians in violation of the laws of war. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Vrecht's scales turned pale. Life? You don't execute me? Martinez looked at him with cold eyes. Death is easy. Death is escape. You will spend the rest of your life in a facility where every morning when you wake, you will see Haven's Rest. You will remember what you did, every day, for the rest of your natural life. That is justice. The pattern repeated across hundreds of trials. Each defendant faced individual judgment. The evidence was presented methodically, professionally, thoroughly. Some defendants showed remorse, others defiance. All were found guilty based on overwhelming evidence. All received life sentences. Ambassador Throck's trial was the most watched. As the government official who had authorized the attack and then lied to the council about it, he represented the political failure that had enabled the genocide. Throck tried to maintain his dignity, claiming he had acted in the Cavrix Empire's best interests, that Haven's Rest had represented a strategic threat that needed eliminating. The prosecution systematically dismantled every claim. Strategic threat, Foster repeated during closing arguments. A colony of farmers, engineers, and families. Children playing in schools. Artists creating culture. Scientists researching agriculture. This was the threat that required total extermination? He brought up the falsified evidence Throck had presented to the council. You lied to the galaxy. You claimed humans were building military installations. The evidence proves these were farms, schools, and civilian infrastructure. You knew this. You lied anyway because the truth would not justify what you had done. Throck was found guilty on all charges. Life imprisonment like all the others. The galaxy watched these proceedings with growing understanding. Humanity wasn't executing defeated enemies. They were applying law, due process, and proper judicial procedure. They were showing that even in victory, even in justified rage, they maintained civilized standards. It was more terrifying than simple revenge would have been. It showed control, discipline, and long-term thinking that made humanity far more dangerous than any species had realized. While trials continued, human forces maintained occupation of Cavrix worlds. But it wasn't the brutal occupation many had feared. Human administrators worked alongside Cavrix civilians to rebuild damaged infrastructure. Schools reopened. Trade resumed. Life slowly returned to normal, but under human oversight. A new generation of Cavrix children learned accurate history in their schools. Teachers, supervised by human educators, explained what had really happened at Haven's Rest. They showed the footage, discussed the trials, and emphasized the importance of laws that protected civilians even during war. Some Cavrix adults struggled with this education. They had believed their military was honorable, their expansion justified. Learning the truth was painful. But others, particularly younger Cavrix, began to understand what their leaders had done in their name. A movement started among young Cavrix citizens. They called themselves the Peace Scales, and they began volunteering to help with reconstruction efforts. Some even requested permission to visit the Haven's Rest memorial site that humans were building. Admiral Chen watched these developments from the Justice Station. She met regularly with Cavrix community leaders, listening to their concerns and frustrations. The occupation was meant to be temporary, but humanity needed to ensure the Cavrix Empire could never commit genocide again. "How long will you occupy our worlds?" asked Vresh, a Cavrix civilian administrator who had cooperated with human forces. Her scales showed genuine confusion rather than hostility. "Until we're confident your military has been reformed and your government understands the cost of what happened," Chen replied. "We're not interested in conquest. We want accountability and change. And the trials? Why not simply execute those responsible?" Chen thought carefully about her answer. "Because death is easy. Dead martyrs can be celebrated, their actions justified by followers. But living with the consequences of their crimes, facing their guilt every day, that serves justice better. And it shows the galaxy that humanity hasn't abandoned civilization. We've simply stopped tolerating those who violate its most basic principles." Vresh's scales shifted to a color indicating understanding. "You're teaching us." "Yes, the hard way, because the galaxy failed to teach you when words would have been enough." The trials concluded after 3 months. The convicted were transported to a specially built prison facility orbiting Haven's Rest. It was designed with large observation windows, ensuring the prisoners could see the world they had destroyed below them every waking moment. The galaxy received a complete record of every trial, every piece of evidence, every verdict. Humanity made sure no one could claim the process had been unjust or rushed. They had applied their own legal standards, proven guilt beyond reasonable doubt, and delivered sentences that prioritized accountability over vengeance. The Galactic Council held an emergency session to discuss the implications. Many species were uncomfortable with humanity's demonstration of military and legal power. Others expressed grudging respect for the thoroughness of the process. The Centauri ambassador, 6 months passed. The Galactic Council chambers looked the same as they always had, but the atmosphere was different. Representatives from 43 species gathered in their designated areas, but now they watched the human delegation with new awareness. The humans no longer wore soft diplomatic robes. They wore military dress uniforms, crisp and formal, a constant reminder of what had happened to the Cavricks. Admiral Sarah Chen took her seat in the restored Earth delegation area. Beside her sat Ambassador James Wright, the civilian diplomat who would handle day-to-day council business. But everyone understood that Chen was the real authority. Earth's military commander had become its primary voice in galactic politics. The shift was deliberate. Humanity was done pretending to be something they weren't. Across the chamber, the Cavricks delegation sat in what had once been their prominent position. There were only 3 of them now, representing a fractured empire that had been divided into autonomous worlds. They didn't speak much during council sessions anymore. They listened, learned, and remembered their lessons. The council president, a dignified being from the Valorian species, called the session to order. His voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there before. This council recognizes Earth's return to full membership. We welcome Ambassador Wright and Admiral Chen. Polite acknowledgement rippled through the chamber. No one applauded too enthusiastically. No one wanted to seem too friendly with the species that had casually dismantled a major empire in 3 weeks. The first order of business was a proposal from Earth. Chen stood and the chamber fell silent. The Cavrick situation revealed a fundamental flaw in galactic governance, she began, her voice carrying clearly. Genocide occurred. The council responded with meaningless sanctions. This cannot be allowed to happen again. She activated a holographic display showing a detailed proposal. Earth proposes the Genocide Prevention Protocol. It establishes clear definitions of crimes against civilian populations, creates rapid response mechanisms, and most importantly, guarantees enforcement. Any species engaging in systematic civilian extermination will face immediate military intervention by a coalition of council members. The chamber erupted in discussion. Several species objected immediately. This gives too much power to military forces, the Sarian delegate protested. The council was built on diplomacy, not military action. Chen's expression didn't change. Diplomacy failed 2.3 million humans. They're dead because the council preferred comfortable words to difficult action. This protocol ensures that never happens again, to any species. And who would lead these interventions? Another delegate asked nervously. Earth? A rotating coalition, Ambassador Wright interjected smoothly. No single species would dominate. But yes, Earth would contribute forces. We've proven we have the capability and, more importantly, the restraint to use it properly. The debate continued for hours. Some species supported the proposal enthusiastically, particularly smaller worlds that feared aggression from larger neighbors. Others worried about setting precedents for military intervention. But no one could argue against the core principle. Genocide needed to be stopped, not negotiated around. The vote came 3 days later. The Genocide Prevention Protocol passed with 78% support. It was the most significant change to council governance in 2 centuries. On Earth, the changes were equally profound. Military academies that had focused on defensive tactics now taught comprehensive warfare doctrine. The lessons from the Cavricks conflict were studied in detail. How to wage total war while maintaining moral authority, how to apply overwhelming force with surgical precision, how to win decisively while keeping the peace that followed. But something else was happening too. Human military forces began deploying across the galaxy, not as conquerors but as peacekeepers and trainers. Species that had dismissed human military capability before now requested human advisors to improve their own defenses. Chen found herself in an unexpected role, teaching other species how to defend themselves without becoming aggressors. It was delicate work, sharing tactics and technology while ensuring students understood the ethical frameworks that made military power legitimate rather than tyrannical. She stood in a training facility on Centauri Prime, watching Centauri soldiers practice urban combat techniques. Their instructor was a human sergeant who had fought on the Cavricks' homeworld, now teaching aliens how to clear buildings without excessive civilian casualties. It's strange, the Centauri military commander said, standing beside Chen. His tentacles coiled thoughtfully. We spent centuries believing warfare was primitive. We avoided developing these capabilities because we thought them beneath civilized beings. Now we scramble to learn what you never forgot. You're learning the wrong lesson if you think warfare is civilized, Chen replied. It's not. It's horror and tragedy even when necessary. But being unprepared for horror doesn't make you civilized. It makes you vulnerable. The commander's tentacles shifted in acknowledgement. The Cavrics learned that lesson too late. Their military was designed for intimidation and easy conquest, not real war against a prepared enemy. We won't make that mistake. Chen watched the training exercise continue. Just remember why you're learning this. Not to wage war, but to prevent it. An enemy who knows you can fight might choose not to test you. That's the real lesson. Back on the Cavrics' homeworld, reconstruction continued under human supervision. The occupation forces had begun withdrawing, as local governments proved capable of self-rule under the new constitutional framework Earth had helped establish. The Cavrics' empire was gone, replaced by individual worlds that maintained cultural connections but governed themselves independently. Vresh, the Cavrics' administrator who had worked with human forces during occupation, had been elected as one of the new world leaders. She met with Chen during a visit to oversee the final withdrawal of human military presence. "Your soldiers are leaving," Vresh observed, watching transport ships loading equipment. "Your people are ready to govern themselves," Chen replied. "That was always the goal. We're not interested in ruling you. Just in teaching us a lesson we'll never forget." Chen looked at the Cavrics' leader. "Your children are learning real history in schools now. They understand what was done at Haven's Rest and why it was wrong. That's worth more than any occupation." Vresh's scales shifted through complex colors. "Some of our people resent you. They see the trials, the occupation, the forced changes as humiliation. Yes, that's natural, but resenting us is healthier than repeating what happened. If anger at Earth keeps future Cavrics leaders from committing genocide, then our work here was successful. And if someone else in the galaxy threatens humans again, will you do to them what you did to us?" Chen didn't hesitate. "Yes, every single time. The galaxy needed to understand that human patience has limits. That lesson is learned now. But so is another lesson. We don't abuse the power we demonstrated. We use it to protect civilization, not to conquer." The memorial at Haven's Rest was completed in the 8th month after the war. It was a massive structure visible from orbit, built at the site of the colony's largest city. The design was simple: 2.3 million pillars of light, one for each person killed, arranged in patterns that showed the colony as it had existed before the attack. The dedication ceremony drew representatives from across the galaxy. Species that had barely acknowledged the genocide before came to pay respects. The Cavrics sent their largest delegation, including many young Peace Scales volunteers who had helped with construction. One of those volunteers was Kresh, a young Cavrics who had been 12 years old when the attack happened. He stood among the light pillars, reading names engraved at their bases. Human names, strange to his tongue but important to speak aloud. An elderly human woman stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. She was one of the 12 survivors from the escape pod, returned now to remember those who hadn't made it. Kresh approached her carefully. "I'm sorry," he said in halting English, "for what my people did, for what I didn't know about until too late." The woman looked at him, saw his youth and sincerity. "You weren't responsible. But my species was. My government. My military. That responsibility doesn't disappear because I was young." She studied his face and saw genuine remorse. "What will you do with that responsibility?" "Make sure it never happens again. I'm training as a historian. I'll teach future generations. They'll know the truth, all of it, so they understand what it cost when we forgot civilization's basic rules." The woman nodded slowly. "Then my friends didn't die for nothing. If you remember them, if you teach others, then something good comes from this horror." Kresh returned to reading names. Behind him, Admiral Chen watched the interaction from a distance. Ambassador Wright stood beside her. "Do you think it worked?" Wright asked quietly. "The whole approach. War crimes trials, occupation, education programs, all of it." Chen considered the question. "Look around. Cavrics youth volunteering at human memorials. Council species